In this podcast, we discuss unsolved cases that may be violent in nature in an effort to keep the cases in the public eye and continue the stories of the victims. Those who choose to or choose against participating are not indicative of involvement in any crimes we discuss. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to episode 3 of Tragedy, a true crime podcast. I'm Elisa.
I'm Michael.
In this podcast, we chronicle victims of unsolved crimes. This series focuses on the unsolved homicide of Jody Kilgore, who was murdered in broad daylight in Crawfordville, Florida, in his own driveway. This year, 2025, marks 11 years since Jody was tragically taken from his family. In this episode, we will summarize and discuss a live community event that took place in 2023 at the Palavar Tree Theater in Crawfordville, Florida. And this live Facebook event was graciously shared with us by Herb Donaldson, who is the founder of the theater. So we're going to start with a brief summary of this community event, and the full Facebook Live event is linked in the show notes. We really encourage you to watch it. In the beginning, Gladys, who, if you will recall, is Jody's mom, and she speaks about her positive experience with law enforcement and her recollections of a generous amount of community involvement at the time of the yearly vigils. So I don't know if we really discussed this really in depth, but there are 2 vigils that are held. They're launched by Gladys's family. And
we have his birthday, and then we have the day of his death.
Right.
What are those days?
Yeah. He was born on August 15th, and we know that the homicide occurred on October 6th. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those events near the end. But Gladys just really has a good recollection of the amount of people who attended the funeral. She does say that anytime she goes into the Wakulla County Sheriff Office, pretty much everyone drops what they're doing.
Yeah, did say that.
They talk to her. She feels very welcomed at the sheriff's office, and she felt, as hard as this was for her, the community involvement at the time of the homicide was real strong. And obviously that helped her. And the family. So following Gladys just speaking about her experiences, Sheriff Miller and the current public information officer, Detective Sriracha, joined Gladys on stage, and they discussed the case for almost 25 minutes. When I first watched the Facebook Live and I saw Sheriff Miller and Detective Sriracha on the stage, I'm not going to lie to you, I was a little surprised.
I was too, because our experience so far is all we've gotten is the kind of the company line, so to speak. This is an opening case, can't discuss anything. And that's what we've seen in reviews. And even with our calls, they have not returned any of our calls yet. So they're definitely not being very transparent here at this time.
Yeah, and we've watched several interviews that have taken place with WCTV and then the local news in Tallahassee. And as a general rule, what we hear, anyone who's speaking up for Wakulla County Sheriff Office, has been several detectives and officers, and they will say it's an active case.
Right.
We know we can't really say anything about it. So when I saw Sheriff Miller and Detective Sriracha on stage, I got pretty interested. We're not going to say everything.
Same here.
So please go back and watch that Facebook Live. But let's discuss what they did talk about, and maybe even more curious what they didn't talk about. So they kind of start off by talking about the story we've heard, and maybe you want to talk about this, about how maybe they could have done a better job in the beginning.
There's been a lot of conversation. It seems like a lot of people talk about, they always bring up the concept that the investigation was messed up at the beginning. We hear about too many people in the scene. We hear about evidence collection wasn't necessarily up to par. At this point, we're talking 11 years later. It's time to stop talking about that. We get it. We understand that there was problems. I think the community, I know me personally, and I think you as well, are interested in what are we doing now? Like, what are we doing as part of this investigation that's happening now? Let's move on from the mistakes that were made. Let's move into what we can do to solve it. We'll talk about this more later, but the thing that jumped out at me as well is Bill Poole is in the audience for this. He says exactly the same thing, and frankly, I could not have agreed with him more.
So let's talk about the information they do give us. Again, this is where I got really excited. I was watching this, listening to it on my own, and you were working, and I think I got up and I ran over to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, wait until you see what is in this. So here's what for us is new. Detective Sriracha did say that they collected over 200 items of evidence in 2014. He also said that over 300 leads have been worked. He talks briefly about the phone call, which we know is at 10:21, and that Toby made the phone call. What we learned here that I don't think I had heard before is the behavior. He said the phone call, the 911 call that Toby made, he was frantic. That's the word he used. He said Toby was frantic when he made the phone call. This, I think, is kind of something we want to discuss. It's some theories. So they very briefly just call out 4 theories. And so I just want to say what they were. They talked about the business partner. They didn't even talk about it. They just said, we have some theories. Maybe it's the business partner. Maybe the wife is involved. Oh, that's Susan. Maybe there was a hitman running around Crawfordville in 2014, right?
We haven't heard that one yet, but that was new to us.
And also the theory that I guess was part of the leads that were called in was that he faked his death.
That one was extremely new, if that's a term we can use. Yeah, I think that one's, we can pretty much throw that one away. And honestly, they kind of presented it as a more ridiculous theme, something they weren't taking too seriously. What was interesting here, though, is what they left out from our perspective. And we'll get into it more a little bit later, but during the different conversations we've had, both on the phone, through email, some of the comments we've seen in Facebook, it's hard to get away from a drug connection. And so I found it at least interesting that that's not included in one of their theories. Now, either that is by design and they're not wanting to indicate that's one of their theories, or I think they're missing something. And that's, we can argue that they are the professional investigators. I'm not saying that's not true, but 11 years into it and we don't have a theory around drugs, considering nearly every person that we've interacted with in some way has brought up some type of drug connection. So where's that theory?
Yeah, that definitely falls in the what wasn't said category.
Yeah.
For me, agreed. Also, Detective Sriracha just discusses at the time they used location mapping, search warrants, subpoenas. There's been some conversation about video footage, which we have heard from several sources came from Toby's home security camera,
yeah.
Call recordings, all those kinds of things that he sort of ticked off as things that they have been, collecting throughout the investigation of this case. Here's where it got most curious for me is when he started talking about biological evidence.
Okay.
Now, you referenced this when we talked to Robin.
Right.
And just the condition of the crime scene.
Yeah, I mean, this is a crime scene that's going to have a lot of biological, specifically for Jody to start with. And so it was nice to hear about biological evidence, and he did indicate that there has been biological sent to various places for review. Now, granted, we have no results, which that's another problem, but it was good to see that we definitely have something outside of Jody.
Yeah, obviously this biological evidence originated with Wakulla County Sheriff Office, right? This is their jurisdiction. They're the first ones there. What we do learn from Detective Sriracha is that biological evidence was submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Additionally, some biological evidence has been sent to the FBI lab for some analysis. Now, we don't specifically hear is it blood? Is it DNA? Are they fingerprints? They really just say,
I have no idea.
Right, biological evidence. Also, it's a relatively new organization, and we also heard about this from one of the reporters that we talked to. It's called the Florida Cold Case Advisory. And Detective Sriracha, I believe he's the actual person who took the case all the way up to the Florida Cold Case Advisory, and they adopted the case. And what that means, according to Detective Sriracha, is that money was given, right? So the Florida Cold Case Advisory is made up of medical examiners, coroners, members of the community, law enforcement from around the state, as well as other folks. And when they adopt a case, then they also, part of that is giving money to the local jurisdiction that brought the case up. So according to Detective Sriracha, now there's this money, right? All this money that can be used specifically for analyzing the biological evidence. And I thought it was kind of shocking to me that he said there was one private lab that ran a piece of biological evidence, and that was $11,000.
Yep.
Just for that. He also talked about, and those of us who follow true crime, we know about this. We know about sometimes a DNA is held in a certain place while we wait for technology, right, to catch up. And if you're a true crime junkie like me, you do know that holding on to biological evidence has solved cases. For example, probably the biggest one is the Golden State Killer. They used DNA evidence and genetic genealogy to solve that case like 30 years after they had happened.
And there's even an active case that I think everyone would know about. If you're not, I'm not sure where you've been, where that's also been discussed as why certain things are, waiting. And that's the John Benet Ramsey case. They've talked about, they have biological now in such small quantity that they don't want to run certain tests because they want to make sure that they get the results that they believe they are looking for, and the technology is adjusted enough or grown enough to where that last test that may have the opportunity to actually run would produce some kind of result.
So as we wrap up, this is about 25 minutes where predominantly Detective Sriracha is talking. Herb, the owner of the theater, he asked them about their theories. Do they have any theories? And Detective Sriracha says, if I had a theory, you wouldn't know it. He doesn't want to put it out there and skew the case. And Sheriff Miller says, my thoughts have really evolved. And he said, quote, it's more than I thought. And that Sheriff Miller then said, we need more evidence. And then that brings us to one thing that really stood out to us in this Facebook Live that Detective Sriracha talked about with a particular piece of evidence. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, he talked about a particular piece of evidence that was something they sent off that didn't get any, quote, hits, I believe what he called, what he referred to it as. And we went back and forth about how this, murder occurred, what we do know about it. We can't imagine that being anything but the murder weapon, which has never been released as far as we can tell.
Yeah, I've heard people say a particular weapon, but I don't know that I've ever seen it written anywhere. I don't know that I've ever seen it. So there are some theories about what the weapon is.
Yeah.
And he just called it a certain piece of evidence that has been tested several times. And I think that's another time where I stopped and I got up and I was like, oh my gosh, you got to hear this, because that really, really stood out to me. Anything else about that 25-minute section where law enforcement was leading?
I don't think so.
Okay. So what happens then is about, and it ends up being about 20 minutes. It's an open Q&A from anyone who is in the crowd. And I'll just say, there were some people that we recognized, and I even shouldn't use the word crowd. There was maybe 10 people there, right? Getting back to, we really need the community to step up for Gladys. We saw a couple uniformed officers.
Right.
Of course, the folks at the stage, Gladys, Detective Sriracha, Sheriff Miller, Herb. Robin is there. Robin
Robin's there.
speaks during
She's
the
in the crowd.
Q&A. Remember, please go back and listen to episode 2. We interviewed Robin. She's Jody's sister. But then, and Michael's already mentioned it, first hand that goes up
Dun, dun, dun.
is Bill Poole.
Poole.
There he is, Bill Poole. And if you'll recall, maybe you want to talk about who Bill Poole is. I know you hit on it a little bit here.
Yeah, Bill Poole, he was part of the sheriff's office to begin with, but what's more significant in this case is he became the private investigator that was hired by Gladys, and he did a bunch of investigation. Now, granted, you have to scope this the right way when you start thinking about his investigation, because he was the PI at this point. He was very limited in what access that he had. I do think they also made a reserve officer for a while, but I don't remember that part. But that's not important for this. And he did come to a conclusion.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the most interesting part. He came to a conclusion, and we know 2 things about that conclusion. Number 1, we know that Robin doesn't agree with him.
Now, when you say conclusion, you mean a name, right?
A name.
A name.
Robin does not agree with it. She says that in her interview with us. And number 2, we know that the state attorney's office turned down the case because of not enough evidence. So is that related to the investigation itself? Is it related to the lack of evidence and lack of accessibility Bill Poole had? Maybe, possibly. So it's kind of a dead end at that point until we have more information. Now, the thing he does talk about in this conversation is the fact, and again, I said it earlier in this conversation, I couldn't agree more, and that is so much conversation, or so much of the topics that have been covered is about how things were messed up. I could not agree more with Bill on this one. We need to move on with that. At this point, it's I'm not going to say it's not important. It is, but it's not relevant anymore, because we can't rewrite history. We have to move beyond it. We have to get our investigators involved in the things that we can do, not the things that we can't change. So that's kind of the Bill Poole saga. He speaks for a while here. I recommend everyone listen to that segment. He's very clear and concise with what he wants to do. He also is very complimentary. Once he gets past, let's stop talking about the past, he's very complimentary about some of the steps that went forward from then on, and indicates that he feels that there's been some good work done by the sheriff's office at this point.
Yeah, phone taps, talks a little bit about following leads, things of that nature. I think all of that could be related to the decision he made of the name that he took up to see if they would file charges. So the Q&A concludes, and Herb, he's the moderator, right? He goes back and he asks law enforcement, what do we need to move this case forward? What can the community do? They talk about 3 kind of overarching ideas. They talk about needing a credible witness. We really need a credible witness, someone who will come forward. They talk about leaning on the evidence. They said they collected 200 pieces of evidence. We know there's biological evidence. Obviously, I think this ties into what happened with the name that was taken up, and that at that point in time, there wasn't enough evidence to lead to even filing charges against that person. And then they talk about transparency, right? And Detective Sriracha says, we agree, because Bill is talking about transparency and we need to know what's going on. And Detective Sriracha says, yep, transparency is something that we need to do for the community.
Now, the transparency here is kind of interesting. Based on our experience while we're creating this podcast, I actually don't feel there's been a ton of transparency here at all. I mean, this particular event, this community event, was in 2023. And we understand that her put this together through personal relationships and things like that, which is fantastic. So, but what's been said since then? Little to nothing. Even when reporters, have gone up to the sheriff's office, they get basically, it's an active case, we're not going to talk to you. The second thing is, we've made multiple calls to the sheriff's office, some of which have included information that we've been able to gather from some sources that we haven't found anywhere in the public record. And not one person from the sheriff's office has reached out to talk to us about that. So there's two things here. They say transparency. They say they follow up on every lead. That hasn't been our experience.
Yeah, agreed. It's been pretty frustrating. I think it's been almost 2 months since we've attempted to open communications with Wakulla County Sheriff Office, and that's why I got so excited when I saw this.
Right.
I do want to circle back to Gladys and this idea of community involvement. Something I think that is very important, and Detective Sriracha did call out, as he said, he's been through every file. He said there was a little bit of a frustration's not the word he used, but files were all over the place when he first took this case. And so once he was able to pull everything together, he said he's read every file, and there isn't one bad thing that's said about Jody in any file he's ever.
That's compelling.
Yes. Yeah. And anything. And that really brings us back to, I can tell from reading some of the Facebook pages where we post the podcast. Thank you, those of you who are listening to the podcast. Everyone loves Gladys. And people are very motivated to do what they can to move this case forward so that there is a resolution for Gladys. No one's ever said a bad thing about Gladys. They talk about her all the time, and how wonderful Gladys is. So we just want to make sure that we circle back that this is, for us, this is really about Jody's family, Gladys and Robin, and those who have been willing to speak with us.
As the community event started to close, something really interesting happened that was kind of unexpected and out of context, but I think it kind of shows some of the underlying frustration or rift between the two different sides of the Kilgore family.
Gladys talks about, and again, making a plea for increased community attendance, which was the theme that we heard throughout the community event. And she discusses the large amount of people who attended Jody's funeral in 2014. And she references the guest book. And she says, the guest book was full. You should see all the names. And law enforcement then says, and I'm almost positive it was Detective Sriracha.
Yeah, he even said that, we'd love the guest book, and we'll reach out to every one of these names to bring more community awareness to these various events that are put on to keep Jody's murder in the public eye.
Right. So law enforcement is saying, hey, let us do our part. Let us reach out to everybody. And Gladys says, well, Susan, Jody's widow, Susan, has the guest book. And this really points to what you had just said. We're seeing a growing rift. It's becoming apparent to us that there is something happening between these two families, right? Susan's holding the guest book, and Gladys would love to have those people not checked out, but invite them to community events, reconnect with those people. But Susan's got the book, and Gladys goes on then to say that at one point, Susan accused her of being involved in Jody's murder. And you can hear someone in the crowd go,
oh yeah.
And I think I might have too. I was like,
I think
whoa.
that shocked me as well. So I'm not surprised that happened.
Yeah, we're getting to a close, and this is what happened at the end, and then there's even more. If that's not shocking enough, then Gladys goes on to say that she had called Susan and she had invited her to this community event because what we see presence at the community event, as I had mentioned earlier, we have some folks. We have Robin, right, Jody's sister. We have Gladys, Jody's mom. There are some other people in the audience. Oh, I think Cindy was there, the other sister, right? She was there.
Yeah, we don't see it on camera, but I feel like she's referred to.
Yeah, I think that's right. Jody's sister. So, but there's nobody like Susan or any of that kind of family. But according to Gladys, she did reach out to Susan, and she called her and she invited her to this community event. And Susan's response, according to Gladys, was, quote, "Just what are you trying to do?" And I mean, I don't even know. I think I had to take a moment of pause. Like I wrote it down to make sure and listen to it several times. We We don't really know what that means, but it's definitely something that resonated with us and Robin's interview too.
The big thing for me is this is already tragic enough for this family. I wonder how much of the disagreements between these two different sides of the family are contributing to this murder not being resolved.
Yeah, I think you're right. So that was the end of the community event. Again, it's linked in the show notes. Please take a moment to watch all of it. You may see or hear something that means more to you than it means to us, but we do have a couple of call to actions. We have a call to action from law enforcement. You want to talk about?
Yeah, we need more transparency. This family needs to be updated more. There needs to be more updates in general. This is the only unsolved murder in Wakulla County. Now, I'm not saying that Wakulla County is not taking that seriously. I think that they are. But I think that, there's a lot of opportunity here to get this in the public eye more and get more people involved and create some additional, I'll say it this way, that transparency also creates the environment of people feel more compelled to, or more comfortable to come forward. And so I think that really needs to be considered.
Yeah, and the other call to action is for the community. And we heard Gladys say, please, people please come to the vigils. We know that it's August 15th, it's October 6th. Please stay active in those Facebook groups. There are several Facebook groups specific to the Wakulla area. Thank you so much, those of you who are sharing the podcast episodes, commenting, reaching out to us via our email or via Messenger. And if you'd like more information about those vigils, the October 6th one is predominantly always seems to be at the courthouse right there in Crawfordville. The August 15th, which is Jody's birthday, that one seems to vary. You can find a lot more information about those two vigils by joining the Help Us Solve the Murder of Our Brother George Joseph Kilgore Facebook group. Despite extensive investigations by the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, no arrests have been made and the case remains unsolved. It is the only unsolved homicide in Wakulla County. Authorities continue to seek information from the public to help solve the case. The Kilgore family has been vocal in their pursuit of justice, keeping the case in the public eye and urging anyone with information to come forward. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement has also shared appeals for assistance on social media, emphasizing the importance of community involvement in resolving this case. If you have any information related to George Jody Kilgore's murder, please contact the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Big Bend Crime Stoppers at 850-574-8477, or you can email us at whokilledgeorgekilgore@gmail.com.